Hello everybody, it's Yashar here, back again with another video, and in this episode I will cover the recent interview of Brian Hill, who is co-founder, ex-CEO, and now executive chair of Aritzia during Fashion Tech Forum, where he talks about the history of Aritzia, how they grew from a single clothing store to one of the fastest growing vertically integrated brands in North America with over 100 stores in US and Canada. He also discussed their cost structure, their future plans for expansion, and he describes the management style of the current CEO of the company, Jennifer Wong, which can give us some ideas about her decision-making process. In the last quarter, Aritzia numbers were terrible, and forecast of the management team was also not great, mainly due to their huge investments in new distribution centers and logistics. But this short-term pain can result in long-term success for the company and investors if the management team have the right mindset and strategies. A lot of investors try to find good stocks to buy by looking at the charts and price action of the stocks, and maybe some basic valuation metrics like PE ratio. In my opinion, price action and basic metrics are important in the short term, but for a long-term investor who wants to hold the company for 5 years plus, for at least 5 to 10 years, the fundamentals of underlying business, like the competitive advantage of the company, their expansion plans, whether the profit margins are expanding, and the return on invested capital should be the most important matrix for investing in a business. With Aritzia, we don't really have much data. We don't have many interviews from the current CEO of the company, Jennifer Wong. However, in this video, we will learn about the mindset of Jennifer Wong through the words of the ex-CEO of the company and the current executive chair of Aritzia. So an interview like this, or a letter to shareholders like the one I covered in my Brookfield video, can really help us to see the mindset of executives of a company and be able to understand the direction that the management team wants to follow, the expansion plans of the company, and finally fundamentals of the business in detail. I chose 6 different clips of Brian Hill interview here, but let's start with a short clip about the history of Aritzia.
Yeah, I think at the time in 1984 even, we were walking in the stores. There's Muzak coming out of speakers in the ceiling and T-bar ceilings. There was poor customer service, ratty old carpets. Everything was either luxury or it was super inexpensive and cheap and would fall apart. And so at the time we thought, kind of did the math on it and said, if we could get some scale here, we could deliver this sort of everyday luxury with our definition at the time was great customer service, beautiful environments, and really beautiful clothing. And we thought we could deliver that at the time and bring it at an attainable price point. So, that really hasn't changed since we opened our first store. And so our market position is more or less the same.
Next, Brian Hill explained what was the main strategy of Aritzia during their initial growth phase. He provides a very simple and at the same time interesting argument about the profitability of the business.
When we opened our first stores, there was sort of people asked what the strategy was, and I go back to our first strategy. We had a board at this point in time, and people go back to our first strategy. And our strategy back in 1984 was, for almost a decade or two, was making sure, it's quite complex, making sure the revenues exceeded the expenses, okay? And what's shocking to me is all these businesses out there that actually doesn't work that way and with huge valuations and things, but at the 1984, they hadn't invented the opposite way yet, so we had to make sure we were doing that. And so I think really the next thing was when we opened here in Soho, and I think it was 2011 or something, and that kind of started put us on the map. It was quite a big swing. It was a lot of rent, and we opened up in the middle of Soho, and our store is still there right now.
He simply mentioned that they always try to make sure that the business is profitable before making a new investment. As he mentions here, a lot of new businesses do not follow this rule. They raise funds, they raise capital, and try to grow before it becomes profitable, and these are businesses that usually end up being bankrupt. The next question is about managing the supply and demand. In case of Aritzia, balancing the infrastructure and personnel with sales growth of the stores. Brian Hill provides insight into how Aritzia decide about their investment in infrastructure.
But how we define infrastructure, everybody in our company defines infrastructure, is people, processes, and systems. And really our infrastructure is the foundation that we layer our sales on top of that. And so we have to make sure we have the right people, we have to make sure that we have the right processes, and we have to make sure we have the right technology and information systems. And And I think that investing in this allows you to grow, and we've really noticed it. We've tried to keep everything in pace. And what I've found probably one of the most challenging things with our business over the last 40 years is you grow your sales. You have to grow your infrastructure like this, because if you don't grow your infrastructure, your sales get too far ahead of it, things start blowing apart at the seams. And if you start growing your infrastructure faster than your sales, what happens is you can't pay for it, and you can't pay for the overhead. So it truly has been, probably in the last 40 years, one of the trickiest things to do is grow that infrastructure and grow those sales, and continually doing this. And we've noticed it with our sales exploding the last 2 years. Our infrastructure is essentially under siege now. We don't have enough people. Karen's working on it.
Next, Brian Hill was asked about their competitors and the risk of the competition for Aritzia brand.
Talk about competing globally. When we started, our competitors were local to us, Canadian, then US, and now globally. How do you think about the competitive landscape when you think about running Aritzia?
Well, first of all, the competitive landscape's changing, right? I mean, you look at 5 years ago, I didn't even know who Shein and is it Temu or something, who these brands were. Luxury has become so important and such a big driver of everything in the world, including creativity and everything else. And but I do think that a lot of people spend too much time looking at the competition. And if you look at our history of 40-year history, and you get this after being in business for this long, you start getting a little bit of perspective. And I think that when we look at our success and our growth over the years, you can't put on, well, Zara came to Canada here and the luxury wing expanded here, or these people were doing a particularly good job of that. I think companies and people, when things aren't going right, it's usually something you're doing and something you're not. It's not something someone else is doing. And so I'm always reminding us to have our teams and everybody, you got to look in your backyard. You got to make sure you're doing things as best you possibly can. And if you're nailing things yourself, you're going to be fine. You really are going to be fine. It doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. And so, our biggest competitor is ourselves. It always has been. And if we can compete with ourselves, if we can deliver, come up with great strategies, execute on those strategies, we're going to be fine. And if we come up with bad strategies or poor execution, we're going to have some challenges. So it doesn't really matter who and what everybody else is doing. Sure, you have to be aware of what everybody else is doing. Sometimes you get inspiration from them. And as you see what other people are doing, and we learn from them and everything else, but you have to take that back and look in the mirror and make sure you're looking after your own backyard.
Next, Brian Hill was asked about technology, and here he tells a story which shows how Jennifer Wong, the current CEO of Aritzia, basically was the person behind building the digital infrastructure and e-commerce foundations in Aritzia, and how she insisted on having a solid and advanced digital infrastructure and data management system instead of trying to solve the problem with the cheapest and easiest solution. This is actually a very interesting example that shows why she is investing so much capital into new warehouses and distribution centers at the moment.
So I guess the one thing we learned early on was, I think it was 2004, 2003, 2002, we started getting these requests for different technologies, a PLM system, product lifestyle management system in product, and a few other systems and Jennifer, who's now the CEO, she came to me one day and said, okay, here's the problem. I've figured it all out. We have all these requests for these different technologies that we need. But the problem with them is we can't build them on this foundation we have, because we have this shitty foundation here at the bottom. We can't build them on this foundation. So what we need to do is get an ERP system of consequence. So that was our decision. She came, I said, so what do you think we should do? She goes, well, it's easy. We need to go with SAP. And I said, SAP, they're huge. She goes, yes, we'll be one of the smallest companies in the world that's ever instituted SAP. But she said, Brian, this is going to be the most intrusive, time-consuming project we will ever do at Aritzia, because it's going to affect every single department and every single person in this company.
Finally, he describes what his current role is in the company, and how Jennifer Wong, the current CEO of the company, was basically running the business even before he makes this transition official.
And I just, I'm kind of doing what I want to do now. I passed off. How we structured it before was we and my marketing department used to cringe when I'd say that, is we sell clothes. You can't tell people that, Brian. We do more than sell clothes. Yeah, but we sell clothes. So Jennifer used to look after HR, IT, finance, warehousing, distribution, and all those, and all the support departments. And then we did the selling clothes portion. I looked after that. And I'm kind of handing off slowly things to her. She got e-commerce first. She's going to get retail second. But I have my dream job now. I'm dealing with product, I'm dealing with marketing, and I'm dealing with our real estate and our design and everything. So I have my dream job now. And so I love going into work.
There you are, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video and my coverage of Canadian stocks. I will be back with updates on other Canadian stocks soon, but until that time, I see you guys in the next video. Farewell.